for our last storyteller, Matt Santos, has taken his experience as a journalist, broadcaster, and self-proclaimed worst father in Prescott to the stand-up stage. He's appeared on comedy showcases and storyteller shows throughout Arizona, and his podcast, The Mile High Show, has been featured at various comedy festivals throughout the Southwest. And I was really happy when I found out Matt had been thinking about having an event like this for as long as I have. So let's give Matt a warm welcome.
Life-changing events affect everybody a little different. As we've heard tonight, it could be a first job, first love, new house, maybe a tragic loss. For me, nothing changed my life more than the process of bringing a new life into the old one. A little background on me, I'm the youngest of 6 children. We grew up in a very noisy and cramped house in the suburbs of Oakland, California. I'm the youngest of 6. My oldest sister is 7 years older than me. 6 kids in 7 years. I like to tell people that's because we were born at a time when my parents didn't have cable or hobbies, but it turns out they actually did have one hobby. Being the youngest in such a crazy household, it was easy to kind of get lost, to get forgotten, to fall back. And I really liked that because it was a little break from the chaos that happened every day in our house. Unfortunately, for me anyway, being out of the eyes and ears of my parents, that meant I was able to find trouble, and I found it quite often, daily if I could. And that resulted in me becoming not just the black sheep of my family, but the black sheep of the town and much of of Alameda County, where I grew up. I was not a good kid. And that followed me into my teens and into my 20s, finding a lot of trouble, sometimes being featured on the evening news. And I tried to clean that up. I tried to straighten out, and throughout my mid and late 20s, I sort of did. And when I was 29, I met a beautiful woman. I thought I had my act together. We got married, and I tried to be a good husband. I did not succeed at that for several years. Before we were married and into our marriage, we had thought and talked about having children, and we said, give it a few years. We'll really get to know each other, and those few years became 5, and 5 became 10, and 10 became a dozen, and we just kind of figured maybe parenthood isn't for us. And in the course of that time, we moved from Northern California to Arizona, and as I said, I wasn't what you would call the best husband. I worked a lot. I worked a lot of late nights, and it got to the point where I would come home from work on a regular basis about 2, 3 in the morning, and many years before, my wife had kind of stopped waiting up for me, so I would come home and she would be asleep. Until one night, 15 years into our marriage, I came home about 3 o'clock in the morning, tiptoeing as much as I can tiptoe into a house. And I walked into our bedroom, and she was wide awake, sitting at the foot of the bed, and she was crying. My first thought was, oh no, who died? Or worse yet, looking around for her suitcases. Maybe she finally wised up and she was on her way out the door. I didn't know. But she looked at me, and she was quiet for a few minutes. And I said, what's wrong? And she had her head down, and she says, I'm pregnant. And my first thought, the thought that I probably should have kept to myself, but I didn't, I said it out loud, was, how did that happen? In hindsight, that's probably a conversation I should have had with my dad 35 years before. But she explained it to me. She was very clear, and she didn't use pictures or videos or anything. She just kind of explained the process. And I was shocked, of course. I didn't know how I would. I mean, how could I, with very little training, become a good father? There was no doubt she was going to be a great mother. I knew her personality, but I came from a household that was not very affectionate. We knew we were loved, but we were loved in a very silent and aggressive kind of way. We weren't an I love you, son, I love you, dad kind of household. My dad would actively make fun and humiliate us, and that's how we knew he loved us, when he teased us to tears. But I knew he loved me. I knew my mom loved me growing up, and I had lost my dad many years before, but there was no doubt he loved me. But I didn't really want that for my soon-to-be child. I wanted to be caring and nurturing and emotional. I didn't know if I was going to be able to do that. So I dove right in. Prenatal books, YouTube dives. I did my research. I was determined I was going to be a good father. I was very into fiction at the time, so I wasn't sure how that was going to develop itself. But I tried, and because my wife, a couple years younger than me, I was 44, she was 42, we were what's known as an at-risk or a high-risk pregnancy. And the Mayo Clinic describes that as at a certain age, specifically for the mother and the baby, that a soon-to-be child is very susceptible to issues, health problems, possible deformities, child development issues, and certain forms of cancer. Now, cancer runs pretty deep in both my family and my wife's family. And then I had spent well over a dozen years abusing my body in every form possible, ingesting every illegal substance I can think of. So I could only think, this poor child doesn't have a chance. But we're going to follow all the guidelines. We're going to follow all the advice. We're going to watch as many videos as we can. We're going to listen to our doctor. So we did. We dove right into it. But because we were a high-risk pregnancy, I say we like I had something to do with it, but we would go in for ultrasounds way more than the usual amount. We were going in pretty regular. And we got to the point where we had very good conversations with the nurse that was administering these tests. It was the same one all the time. A lot of communication with our doctor. And we would joke with the nurse administering the ultrasound test, and we would have a lot of small talk and banter. It was pretty lighthearted. And then about the 10th week in, this normally jovial nurse is doing the test, and she's studying the screen very intently. And she just said, What's mean? She responded with another She goes, I'll be back in a minute. She went outside, brought in a doctor, a strange doctor, not our doctor. And he proceeded to look at the screen and did the little wandy thing and said, I was getting to really hate the word And he left, printed out some pictures and left. About 10 minutes later, a very long 10 minutes, the nurse came in and she said, well, the doctor forwarded over these test results to your doctor, and your doctor would like you to meet in her office when you can. When can you meet with her? I said, well, it's Tuesday. How about Thursday afternoon? She says, how about tomorrow morning at 8 a.m.? So 8 a.m. it was. We showed up the next morning. That whole visit is kind of a blur. The doctor told us, she said, well, we saw this growth earlier. We just assumed it was a cyst. That's pretty common. But it's not. It is a tumor. And prepare yourself, it's 90% chance this is a cancerous tumor. We need to take a look at this right away. Here's some pamphlets on prenatal cancer treatment. Here's some pamphlets on chemotherapy and how it'll affect the mother, how it'll affect the baby. And you have to make some decisions, but we need to take a look at this as soon as possible, but we can't do so until you're well established in your second trimester, so about 4 weeks from now. So for 4 weeks, we tried to sleep and we couldn't. We tried to be normal and we couldn't. We continued to just try to continue, and that was difficult. So we went in for for this we, again, inserting myself really hard into this story that I really have nothing to do with. But my wife goes in for this surgery. And they wanted to take a look. And that whole day is kind of a blur. The doctor comes out after the surgery and says, both mommy and baby are doing fine. It was a tumor. It was growing faster than the baby. It's doubled in size since the last time we did an ultrasound. So I just decided to take it out. And I don't think it was cancerous, but we don't know what it was. It was growing and it was big. But they're doing fine. That's really what I remember from that morning. And then she said, in all honesty, it's been there longer than the baby. Had you not gotten pregnant, we wouldn't have known this, and it really could have been fatal for your wife. So getting pregnant really saved your wife's life. And of course, I was ecstatic. So over the next few weeks, few months, we really dove into this pregnancy more with a vigor. One of the most challenging things of this was attending those childbirth classes at YRMC, because at 44 years old, I was the oldest person in there, including the teacher, including the 39-year-old soon-to-be grandma who was there because her daughter was giving birth and her son-in-law was overseas, stationed over in Iraq. I look into the class the first night and I see 4 people I know. 2 recent graduates of Chino Valley High School, where I worked, and 2 students, one was a junior and one was a senior, currently going to Chino Valley High School, where I worked. I felt old. And that senior walks up to me and goes, Mr. Santos, what are you doing here? Is this your daughter? My wife at 42 really loved that. I did not. So in the course of this class, they explained to all those new fathers, because we were so excited to be there, said, now remember, dads, if this turns into a cesarean section, you will not be allowed in the delivery room. Won't be allowed in there. One dad stood up and says, just try and keep me out of there. I'm going to be there. And I was secretly praying for a C-section, because the windsock's right down the street. I'll be by the pool table. I'll be fine. You can update me later. So, several weeks later, her water breaks. We rush to the emergency room. We're there 14 hours in labor. And then against her wishes, but in an answer to my prayers, the doctor says, all right, it's C-section time. I said, all right, hon, I'll see you on the other side. As the nurse is handing me scrubs, I says, no, I don't need these. I'm not allowed in there. I'm fine. She goes, who told you that? I said, everybody, the teacher, the class, they lied. Get suited up. You're going in. So I put the scrubs on, the little booties on my feet. I'm walking down what had to be a 4-mile hallway of polished glass floors, trying not to fall and need a doctor of my own. And we get to the delivery room, and thankfully, my wife's laying down with a little divider, and I'm on this side of the divider with the anesthesiologist. The whole construction zone's going on that side. And after a while, I hear the cry of an infant, and I look over, and they're doing the little APGAR test. On the other side of the room, they've got him. He's a perfect little boy. And then the nurse says, Dad, come on over. I want you to cut the umbilical cord. I said, you are obviously already cut it because you're on the other side of the room. She goes, we saved you a piece. I said, what is that, a piece of cake? What? It's my son, not pie. So I go over anyway, and sure enough, they had me cut a little thing, and he's beautiful. He's a great little boy. And he says, okay, now carry him over to the nursery. So you're crazy. I can't walk down the hallway carrying a baby, got a camera around my shoulder. I can't do this. You guys went to college. You do it. My health plan evidently doesn't cover that. So I had to carry him down. I get to the nursery, way down the hallway, shuffling my feet, trying not to fall. I hand him to the nurse in the nursery. She's going to go clean him up. I go check on my wife. I come back to the nursery, and there's a bunch of empty cribs, and then 3 cribs there. 2 on each side wrapped in pink, and a beautiful little boy wrapped in blue in the middle. My son, the beloved, right in front of me. So I pull up a chair and I go into the most heartfelt conversation I've ever had in my life. Talking to this beautiful little boy, explaining his family history. You are the latest in a long line of firstborn Anthony Santos, is your Uncle Tony, who you're going to meet soon. My Uncle Tony, your great Uncle Tony, who was the most weird, strange person you've ever met. He's passed away now. Your great-grandfather and your great-great-grandfather, all Tony Santoses. And I tell him about his grandfather, my father, who was a great storyteller, a hilarious human being, but he struggled with so many things. And I'm telling him all this, and I'm telling him stories about me growing up, all the mistakes I've done and made, stories that to this day he's probably too young to hear. And after about a half hour, I'm drained physically, emotionally, mentally. And I sit back and I'm wiping tears from my eyes. And I glance up and I see a nurse walking in with a fourth little baby in her arms. In blue. And she says, "Are you ready to meet your son?" Who's this imposter I just spent 30 minutes pouring my heart and soul to? And more importantly, am I going to be responsible for this stranger's therapy when he's 20? Flash forward 14 years. That fourth baby is now 14 years old. And for the very first time, because he's standing right here in the back of the room, he's heard how not only did he save his mom's life, but he pretty much saved mine as well.
Wow, Matt. Oh, what a great, let's have it for all the storytellers today.